On this edition of Independent Sources, Resurrecting a Fiery Past, artists from the South Bronx chronicle the burning and rebuilding of their neighborhood.
And Icons and Superman, finding a home for characters of color in the two-dimensional world of comic books. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. The South Bronx is one of the poorest districts in the United States, and to many has become synonymous with urban decay and squalor. Images of burnt-out buildings and abandoned vehicles are still branded into the minds of many who saw flames reaching into the night sky during the 1970s when ABC News reported that the Bronx was burning.
But while the community was being erased by corrupt landlords and drug dealers, its spirits were being raised on the shoulders of an emerging hip-hop and break-dancing scene. This transition in the community's history is now on display as part of an exhibit called Seis del Sur, or Six of the South.
The exhibit is being held at the Bronx Documentary Center and features the work of 6 Puerto Rican photographers who were documenting everyday life in the borough. I sat down with one of the artists, Joe Conzo Jr., and the center co-founder, Danielle Jackson, to talk about the Bronx's image and its history. Great shots, great shots. Tell us a bit more about your shots, Joe.
Well, my shots pretty much encompass a little bit of everything of the Bronx. You know, some hip hop, some salsa, some, demonstrations in the Bronx during the early 80s, late 70s, and just a whole broad compass.
It's a fascinating idea. Whose idea was it and how did it come about?
To be honest with you, it was about 3 years in the making. I had a show at Hunter College at El Centro de Puerto Rican Studies and Arts, and the other photographers, David Gonzalez, Angel Franco, Francisco Reyes, Ricky Flores, and Edwin Pagan came to show support. And it's like, they were looking at my images, and it's like, wow, we shot the same thing during the same time. And next thing you know, we were doing a social media / Facebook photo battle. Okay. And it was like, let's do a show. Let's do a show. And it's just been beautiful, last 3 years putting it together with Danielle and Mike's help from the Bronx Documentary Center, and it's long overdue.
And Danielle,
Yes.
what was so fascinating about these photographs that you wanted to put them on an exhibit?
Well, we felt it really represented an important story in terms of the way the Bronx is perceived. The Bronx is so maligned in terms of its reputation, and these photographs are so intimate and they're real, and they just tell another side of the story that people think they know. A lot of people know about the South Bronx in terms of the fires and the rubble and all of this, but people were living there and having lives and relationships and families and neighbors, and you see that in the exhibition. So I think what really strikes us is how intimate it is. It really is like a neighborhood family album.
Why is the Bronx maligned? I mean, I covered the Bronx when I was a reporter. Like you said, it's a great place, so why is that?
Gary, I don't know. It goes back to Howard Cosell, during the Yankee games, stating the Bronx is burning, and, it's stigmatized.
And yeah, the Bronx Zoo, remember?
The Bronx Zoo, and it's just been stigmatized. I travel a lot today around the world, and I get answered the question, 30 years after the fact, is the Bronx still burning? Is it still bad? And I'm like, no, the Bronx is actually flourishing, and a lot of good things are happening.
There was I read somewhere once in one of the papers in New York talk about how Brooklyn Heights, Long Island City have been able to bounce back really nicely, but the Bronx has also. So why are we not hearing about that story?
Well, I think that one of the reasons that is because it's been underrepresented, which is why it was so important for us to do this show. I think that there's some politics that are at play, maybe not necessarily city politics, but in terms of I don't know, a lot of people don't venture to the Bronx because they don't know what's there. I think the Bronx is still a lot of, what I love about the Bronx, you know, I moved to the Bronx in the spring, is it's a lot of sort of neighborhood enclaves where people have lived there their whole lives. I think maybe for an outsider they wouldn't necessarily know how to penetrate that or where to go. But I don't think that people really hear enough about what is happening, and it definitely is changing and has improved.
Have you chronicled that change? I mean, most of the photographs that we looked at from the 70s and the 80s, what about the Bronx of today?
I still shoot today when I'm not, you know, on an ambulance saving lives, delivering
Oh,
babies.
we should let people know that
Yeah,
you
I work for the fire department,
Yes.
paramedic there. But yes, I have chronicled and shot the Bronx since a teenager up until today. And yes, Danielle's right. A lot has changed, and you know, maybe there is some politics involved, but you know, come to the Bronx. I mean, home of the Yankees, the Botanical Garden, the Bronx Zoo, Edgar Allan Poe's house. We're the only borough attached to the mainland. There's so much, you know, going on there.
Oh, is the new Bronx part of this exhibit? The photographs of today's Bronx, or is it all about the past?
Yeah, it's really looking at the time period, the late 70s and the 80s, when you know, the reputation for the Bronx was maybe near its worst, and what we're able to do is just show a more complex portrait. So it's not, the exhibition doesn't sugarcoat the Bronx, and it doesn't deny the problems that the Bronx you know, experienced at that time, but it just is more of a layered and nuanced story.
And what is the takeaway? What do you want people to get out of exhibit when they come and look at it?
Well, I'd like to show that, you know, with all the devastation and turmoil going on, there was families raising families there. We still had a good time. I think I turned out pretty well. You know what I mean? And this is an insider's perspective instead of an outsider coming up to the Bronx to document, you know, the turmoil and leaving. I mean, this is our Bronx, our neighborhood. This is what we saw. And yes, we had a lot of dirt and grime, this and the other. But you know what? We had a lot of other beautiful things going on then.
How many pictures do you have in the exhibit?
There are 36 pictures, 6 for each photographer, but we also have a slideshow that has more images that were not included in the prints, and we've also got a really great oral history with the photographers speaking about their recollections and making the images. So it really is a rich experience to come
Well, I have a question for you, and not for Joe. Okay. I mean, Angel Franco is one of the best photographers in the world. How does he stand up against Angel in this exhibit?
Oh.
Wow, that's a loaded question.
That is so loaded. I think, you know, what's exciting about this exhibition is that, you know, Joe mentioned that they were teenagers, and for a lot of the photographers, it was really in the beginning of their creative careers. Angel was a little bit older, but, you know, I don't think there's any comparison. Everyone does something differently, and what unites everyone is that they all sort of had a relationship where you get to see a certain intimacy. So I think all of the photographers, you know, we wouldn't show it if we didn't think all of the photographers were outstanding.
Did you grow up with these guys, these other photographers? Did you guys know each other prior?
Actually, no. And, you know, as Danielle says, Angel is the grandfather of the group. And, you know, you got to understand something. I've looked up to Angel for many years. I mean, he's just a fantastic photographer. But we had known of each other and never met. And when we finally got to meet, and
on social media mostly, or
mostly in the social, believe it or not, and just, you know, found out that our visions during that time were so similar. It was just uncanny. It just had to happen.
So what's next?
In terms of the exhibition?
Yeah.
Well, we have a number of events scheduled for this month that all relate to the Bronx in the 80s or deal with the issues of sort of Puerto Rican artistic process. We didn't really discuss that, but all of the photographers are Puerto Rican, and it has to do a lot with the identity, I think, for everybody and their vision photographically. This coming weekend, we'll have a panel discussion called Steel Canvases, which is looking at different generations of graffiti writers. Okay. We will have a screening of a film, Latinos Beyond the Real, which was photographed by Edwin Pagan, who's one of the photographers in the show. And then we'll also do an artist talk on March 9th, which will have all of the photographers there, and they'll be able to speak and talk about their experiences. We'll have a slideshow. So I encourage everyone to make the short trip outside of Manhattan or from wherever you're coming from to join us.
Right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thanks.
The exhibit Seis del Sur will run through March 8th at the Bronx Documentary Center.
Still to come on the show, Earth's mightiest black superheroes unite.
Before that, Abby Shola has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. The Amsterdam News reports that the Sean Bell Community Center in Jamaica, Queens, is on the brink of closing down due to a lack of funding. The center was opened in memory of the Queens native who was shot and killed by police in 2006. The center was opened with a $196,000 community development block grant awarded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development a year after Bell's death. Since 2011, the center has offered free computer literacy classes, a job readiness program, dance classes, and after-school mentoring. Local politicians such as City Councilman Leroy Comrie are working towards helping to keep the center open. Have Asian Americans been overshadowed in the debate on immigration? Writer Erwin de Leon thinks so. In an opinion piece published by Feet in Two Worlds, Leon says he feels immigration is almost exclusively considered a Latino issue. Meanwhile, 65% of Asian American voters supported comprehensive immigration reform, and 70% voted for President Obama. That according to a poll conducted by the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Leon adds that 11% of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. are Asian, and highly educated Asian immigrants can wait up to 6 years before earning a green card. Polish Americans in the New York metropolitan area are now able to listen to Polish language programming on the radio. Novogenic reports that a news station called Radio Polska will broadcast news, interviews, and Polish music in the tri-state area. The new programming will air every Sunday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. from a studio in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Radio Polska is being produced by a group of radio enthusiasts who've worked at defunct Polish stations in the past. This is the first attempt to bring Polish language radio programming back to the airwaves since Polski Radio USA was liquidated last year. The Brooklyn Bureau filed a report on the cultural challenges of the increasing number of Yemeni-owned bodegas in Brooklyn. Since Yemenis are Arabs, many have had to make some modifications to the way they approach the bodega business. For example, like most bodegas, Yemeni-owned delis offer BLT sandwiches, but customers should expect beef bacon instead of pork. Also, some don't sell alcohol since it's prohibited in Islam. Others have had to go against their faith to meet the demand for such products in order to keep their businesses afloat. The Brooklyn Bureau points out that the number of Yemeni Brooklynites has increased by more than 400% from 2000 to 2010. Many favor self-employment. And finally, from Irish Central, Hurricane Sandy helped create a defining moment in the career of a former Irish construction worker turned carpenter. John McLaughlin started his own one-man carpentry business after a motorcycle accident ended his work in construction. Since then, his 30 years of expertise in woodworks, including clocks, motifs, and tabletops, became his sole focus. The highlight of his career came recently after he created wooden fiddles that were auctioned off to benefit local Irish communities hit hard by the storm. He received widespread acclaim after the fiddles were shown at a fundraising event called New York City's Sandy Session. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. Comic book superheroes don't seem to be kid stuff anymore. They're leaping and smashing their way from dark and dingy specialty stores to the bright lights of Broadway in some cases. Recent successes of films such as The Avengers and Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy have made being a geek chic while raking in billions of dollars worldwide.
Even as characters such as Thor and Batman become more commonplace, there are others that are lesser known, like Icon, a black analog of Superman. These minority characters are rare in the four-colored world of comics and often portrayed as sidekicks or villains.
Several independent artists and writers have sought to address this lack of black and other ethnic heroes in the mainstream by publishing their own characters, with names such as Night Jack and The Descendants.
I spoke to two creators, Regine Sawyer, who publishes her books out of Queens, and Jerry Kraft, a syndicated artist, on a strip called Mama's Boys. We talked about how they are trying to secure a seat for their characters in the pantheon of heroes. I'd like us to start with this short piece produced by Zyphus LeBron about a recent comic book festival.
The Schomburg's Langston Hughes building was packed wall to wall during the recent Black Comic Book Festival. The event was an opportunity for several independent creators to get their characters out to a new audience.
This one is the first book, and it follows this guy, Jack McGuire, who goes from being a detective to becoming the greatest superhero of all time.
The greatest superhero of all time, a title often reserved for the likes of more mainstream heroes like Superman, but artists like John Jennings are trying to bring more diverse faces into the conversation. Jennings is one half of an artistic team that calls itself Black Kirby. The name is a play on the legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby, who created some of the most well-known comic book superheroes, such as Spider-Man and the X-Men. Jennings and his partner have reimagined several of Kirby's creations, including the Norse god Thor as the black god Shango, and Captain America as Major Sankofa.
I saw a study recently in a journal, maybe it was like visual communication or the communication studies, that basically looked at the fact that when people don't see themselves reflected positively in popular culture, it demeans them. It makes them feel low. They don't have high self-esteem. So it's very important for everyone to see themselves in these, as a hero, as a villain, as anything.
Though the Black Kirby team has taken to making carbon copies of well-known characters, many of the creators have dug into the corners of their own imaginations to create new worlds and origins for their heroes. Yumi Odom is the founder of the East Coast Black Age of Comics Convention. He oversees the creation of several characters. His philosophy is no carbon copies and no sidekicks. Although the characters he promotes are all black, he says that it's not an attempt to alienate any audience.
These images are for anybody. The ones that we do, anybody needs to see them. They're not just for so-called black people, whoever, minorities. They're for the whole planet. We don't put ourselves in the margins on purpose.
For other creators like Juliana Smith, it goes beyond just removing black characters from the margins. Her book, Afrocentric, features a biracial female lead. Rather than leaping tall buildings in a single bound, her characters talk about real issues like gentrification and race.
I'm not simply interested in a politics of representation that just has a female doing what a man would normally do. I'm interested in how can I get different conversations in a comic book that wouldn't normally be there. So conversations about race, conversations about gender, in comedic ways, of course, right? But I'm not simply interested in just having a black character just to have a black character.
Zyphus LeBron, Independent Sources.
Jerry, you and Regine were both at this event. Was the audience diverse in terms of age, race, and gender?
It was definitely diverse as far as gender and age. I think primarily it was an African-American audience because unfortunately, like Yumi said, sometimes that people do think that stuff that's written for us is specifically, for an African-American audience. But we had kids, we had some seniors, we had men, we had women. In that particular aspect, it was very diverse.
Regine, how strong is this sentiment that comics with black characters would alienate a white or more mainstream audience?
I don't think it's entirely accurate. When I was at the Schomburg, I saw other ethnicities outside of African American. I saw a few people that were Asian, Caucasian. This whole world is very vast, and it's opening itself up to different people, getting more and more diverse. I believe people are ready to see characters that don't look exactly like them. So I think it's getting there. It's going to take some time, but I believe it's getting there.
Why aren't there enough black comic book characters? We'll talk about the lack of female characters, but first of all, Regine, why aren't there enough black characters?
Well, in terms of the mainstream, I think they're trying to appeal to what they believe is the mainstream. And the mainstream to them perhaps might be a more Caucasian audience. And that's why they refrain from being as diverse as they should be. In terms of indie comics, that's our foray. We're becoming more diverse and we're growing. We want to see books that look like us. But in terms of the mainstream, I believe they want to appeal to what they feel is the mainstream at this time.
Jerry, you've written that many publishers don't think that boys, teen boys, especially boys of color, can read, and that's why they're not interested in that market. Can you elaborate on that thought?
Yeah, I've had a few off-the-record conversations with publishers because a lot of the stuff that I do is primarily aimed at our boys because I'm the father of a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I see that they do read when they find something that they're interested in. I'll talk to other kids that are like, well, I would like to, but they're not interested in Twilight or, you know, some of these other Hunger Games, that kind of thing. So one of the things that I do is specifically gear my books towards kids of color, but then also to boys of color as well. And to elaborate on what Regine was saying, they think that a lot of times the things that feature us as main characters will not sell to the mainstream. That's a big problem because even when you look at the manga, which is based on, you know, Japanese animation and characters, everybody is reading that, and they don't say, well, this is only for Asian Americans or Asians to read. And I grew up reading Iron Man and Fantastic Four, so if we had said that, okay, well, those are only for, you know, Caucasian readers, then I would have never read that. But there seems to be some kind of a line drawn when it's characters that are of African descent. A lot of times they think that it's only for that audience, and that's where I see one of the biggest problems.
So who are these publishers generally? Is it a problem that there are not enough black publishers?
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about the Black Comic Book Fest at the Schomburg was that you got to see people who are publishing their own work. And I think it's a good thing because we can really tailor the story how we want it and actually write it for our audience, and we don't have to dilute the message at all. But the other thing is, the bad thing is, since we are small publishers and indie publishers, we don't always have the finances and the distribution. So if I do a book, you know, I will take them around with me and I have it on my website and various websites, but you may not be able to pick it up in Michigan or Chicago or somewhere like that. And I think that's one of the problems that a lot of us have is, you know, one, having to use our own finances and resources, and two, having a more, finite distribution level. So we really need venues like this Black Comic Book Fest where we can actually look and interact with our fan base and hopefully increase it.
Regine, you're a publisher and creator. Tell us more about your work and who your audience is.
Well, my flagship title is The Rippers. I also have Ice Witch and Eating Vampires. The Rippers is about an intergalactic bounty hunter who's accused of a crime she doesn't remember committing. Ice Witch is entangled in that series as well. Eating Vampires is an offshoot.
Ice Witch, is she more of an anti-hero than a superhero?
She begins as an anti-hero. She's originally an assassin who gets married and has a baby and now accompanies after her child.
There's this idea that a lot of the black superheroes are villains. What do you think about that, and how are you trying to counteract that image of the black superhero?
Oh, I don't think that's true. There are plenty of black heroes. I would like to see more of them, of course, but there are plenty of black heroes. I just chose to take a young woman and sort of turn her on her head. I wanted to do something a little bit more dynamic than what I was seeing in the media.
What about in the mainstream? You know, how are the black heroes portrayed? Are they superheroes or anti-heroes?
well, there's superheroes and villains. I probably can name for you more heroes than villains, but they're there, the ones that are in the mainstream.
What does it mean for you to be a female comic book creator? What are the challenges and the reactions you're encountering?
Well, some of the challenges are when I go to shows and I have my own booth, people think that I'm there to promote the booth. They think I'm a booth girl and not a publisher or a creator. They'll ask, oh, where are the people that are running this table? This table looks great. Right, Jerry?
Yeah.
You know, I have to say, no, I'm the boss. I sign the checks. That's what I'll have to say. For the most part, people are very, very polite and very nice. Some I'll have to say, in terms of my colleagues, some like to hang around the young woman, not Jerry.
Right. Thank you. You know, that's one thing I was, you know, because I was in charge of, you know, bringing in the artists to the Black Comic Fest.
Yeah.
So we had Jennifer Crute, and Regine and Jules, and I really talked to them. I said, okay, do you want to be at the same table? Do you want to be at different tables? I wanted to be really sensitive because I didn't want to just group them and be like, hey, they're the female cartoonist over there. And, you know, Regine gave her feedback and Jennifer gave hers, and I spoke to Jules. And I really think that we had a nice cross-section. And I think we had four female creators representing, which was nice. It was a nice, you know, obviously we'd like to have more, but we really researched to get at least the top of the line there. So Regine and Jennifer were the two of them that came to mind quickly.
And I like that you mentioned before we started that you have a line of T-shirts with women superheroes, and that was very successful at the event. I want to toss it to Jerry and briefly ask you about your work.
Probably what I'm most known for is creating the Mama's Boys comic strip. And that is a syndicated comic strip that's been distributed by King Features since about 1995, I think. And it goes to various newspapers around the country. I've published 3 books based on the comic strip. And in addition to that, you know, I've done children's books. So I can write and do the illustrations and the layout. So I've got books for, you know, very young kids all the way up to teenagers. And I'm doing a book that is about a teenage superhero. That's an actual novel. Now, not a graphic novel, but a novel. And when we talk about getting our Black boys to read, this is something that I'm going to try my best to prove that I can get that audience. And it's called Positive Force.
What's your advice to parents to get children more involved with reading and comic books? And teachers, perhaps, how open are they to comic books?
Well, I think a lot of it is, you know, when I was younger, and I just wrote a blog on getting boys to read. When I was younger, a lot of my vocabulary came from reading Marvel Comics. You know, Stan Lee in particular, every issue was Armageddon and macabre and incredible and astonishing. And so I really learned to read from comic books. I think that, you know, certain teachers and schools may look down on it, but I, for one, am someone that's like anything that's getting kids to read. Like even, you know, my kids play Xbox, but when they get Game Informer magazine, I make sure that they actually read the articles to find out about the games, not just look at the pictures. Reading along with your kids is another good one. But really finding stuff that they like and expose it to them.
We have to wrap the conversation here. Thank you both for taking the time and talking about this. Regine Sawyer and Jerry Kraft. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our show this week. Thanks again for joining us.
Till next time, be independent-minded.